Kia ora and welcome to the Measurement Standards Laboratory Virtual World Metrology Day celebration. My name is Cynthia Lendrum and I'm your MC for this event. It's a beautiful day here in Wellington, and while we're sad that you can't actually be here to celebrate with us in person, it's great that we can connect with you virtually and share a program of informative talks from our stellar lineup of speakers. And the beauty of being virtual means we can also welcome a number of our colleagues from NMIA in Australia, as well as some attendees from Singapore, UK and Pakistan. Before introducing our first speaker, I'd let you know about the housekeeping rules. And obviously, in case of a fire or emergency alarms, please follow your own evacuation plan. So wherever you are in New Zealand or beyond, I trust you have one. And for any bathroom and refreshments, I'll leave this completely up to you. We welcome questions at any time this afternoon, and we will endeavour to answer these for you as time allows. For answering your question or asking your questions, please use the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and we will direct this to the relevant speaker. You are also welcome to use the chat function, also at the bottom of your screen, to post comments. After this event today, we will be providing a recording and a script of the questions and answers, and we'll make that available on our website. I'd now like to introduce to you the Director of the Measurement Standards Laboratory, Dr. Fleur Francois, to officially welcome you to World Metrology Day 2020, MSL style. Welcome, Fleur.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Fleur Francois and I'm the Director of the Measurement Standards Laboratory of New Zealand. It gives me great pleasure today to welcome you to our virtual celebration of World Metrology Day. And I'd like to say a special kia ora to all our colleagues who are joining us from all over New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Egypt, Pakistan and Singapore. Today is the 145th anniversary of the signing of the Meter Convention, which provides the basis for our global measurement system. And that underpins trade, scientific innovation and the protection of human health and the environment. The theme for World Metrology Day this year is Measurements for Global Trade. Now more than ever, we rely on the measurement system to assist us in fighting the global pandemic and to protect the health and economic well-being of our citizens. The Measurement Standards Laboratory is part of New Zealand's national quality infrastructure, along with International Accreditation New Zealand, Standards New Zealand, Trading Standards, and the Joint Accreditation System of Australia and New Zealand. Collectively, we have been responding to requests to set up new accredited testing labs in New Zealand to fight against COVID-19, test and verify the performance of medical thermometers and personal protective equipment, and support R&D efforts for improved ventilators and other medical devices. Our laboratories were closed at Gracefield during COVID Alert Level 4 in New Zealand, except for the maintenance of critical standards, such as New Zealand Standard Time. And thankfully, we successfully made changes to daylight savings during lockdown. Our laboratories are now fully operational under Alert Level 2, and we encourage you to get in touch so we can talk about your measurement needs. This year, I was really hoping to welcome you to the opening of our new building here at Gracefield. Sadly, the completion of our new laboratory building has been delayed due to the pandemic. And Cliff Hastings will give you an update after me, just talking to you about where we are with that project and when you can expect to see us in our new home. I look forward to welcoming you to our new laboratories once the building is completed and it's safe to do so. Last year on World Metrology Day, we celebrated a significant milestone among the international community, and that was the International System of Units, also known as the SI, being redefined in terms of constants of nature. instead of relying on reference to physical artefacts, such as the international prototype kilogram stored in a vault in Paris. This enables us to make much more precise and accurate measurements traceable to the SI anywhere in the world without needing to refer to a primary standard that is held offshore. This has become particularly important in light of the disruption to supply chains caused by the pandemic and a need for New Zealand to be resilient and self-sufficient in key infrastructure, such as maintaining the national measurement system. Dr. Murray Earley will give you a brief update and lead a question and answer session on MSL's efforts following the redefinition of the SI. Dr. Fong will be leading a question and answer session this afternoon discussing our progress on building the Kiwi Kibble balance, which will provide New Zealand with a robust solution onshore for measuring the kilogram and providing industry with traceable mass measurement. The pandemic has also pushed us to find remote and digital solutions for working and problem solving. Metrology has much to contribute to this, and Dr. Blair Hall will be leading a question and answer session talking about MSL's efforts around data metrology. We're also proud to be doing our bit to support the development of the next generation of metrologists to support industry. Boy, that was a tongue twister. We have a panel discussion and a question and answer session featuring Nina Ronsky, who is a measurement technician from our apprentice program, her MSL supervisor, Lenice Evergreen, and Paul Biddick from Air New Zealand, who's one of our industry partners on this program. We look forward to welcoming more young people into our apprenticeship program when we open recruitment later this year. So thanks for joining us today and enjoying this new virtual experience. Stay safe, be kind, kia kaha, Aotearoa. Back to you, Cynthia.
Thank you very much, Fleur. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Cliff Hastings is the MSL Manager of Electrical Time and RF, and Cliff will provide an update on the new MSL building. Thanks, Cliff.
Thank you, Cynthia. So I'll just bear with me one moment and I'll share a screen here so we can jump into this overview of what's happening with our new building. So, as Cynthia said, I'm Cliff Hastings. I'm part of the management team at Measurement Standards Laboratory of New Zealand. And today I wanted to provide you with an overview of a very significant project that we've been working on over the past couple of years. That project is the construction and eventual move into our new purpose-built metrology laboratory. So I think one of the first things to make note of is why we're investing in this new facility. So here's a couple of images of our current premises, the Mackay building at our Gracefield site. On the left is the Mackay building from 1943 when the site was very new, and on the right, to give it some context, in the same year we can see Eleanor Roosevelt visiting workers operating from the Mackay building during World War II. So you can see the building we currently operate from has been providing us great service for some time. However, as time and technology marches on and as measurement capabilities increase, we've found ourselves in a position where there's a very strong business and science case to invest in a purpose-built laboratory so that MSL can continue to remain at the forefront of measurement science and calibration capabilities in New Zealand and continue to be an active participant in the global metrology community. So not all of MSL will be moving into that new laboratory. The new building will only be used to house those measurement standards areas that are currently located in that Mackay building. So that means we'll be moving time and frequency, radio frequency, electrical and temperature standards. So in this image here, you can see our plan is to relocate services from the current location into the new lab space. The new laboratory location is indicated by the blue arrows on the right of this image, indicating where the new lab is beside that main car park area. Our time and radio frequency standards won't move into that same building as electrical and temperature. Rather, as you can see on the image, time and RF will be moving into a new purpose-built laboratory within one of our existing buildings on site. So over the past couple of years, the MSL team has worked really closely with the Callaghan Innovation Gracefield Innovation Quarter Program team. That's the team responsible for redeveloping all of our Gracefield site. So we've worked with them to conceptualise and design a new purpose-built laboratory. The building has progressed really well, and in fact it is very near completion. This image you can see here was taken only last week, and certainly from the external view, you can see it very much looks like a completed building. In terms of the new building layout, you can see in this image a plan view of the laboratory. The top half of the laboratory is all temperature standards laboratories and some shared utility spaces. And the lower half of the laboratory is pretty much all open plan laboratory space for our electrical standards team. So this is the first new laboratory built on our site for quite some time. And there have been a number of great lessons we've learned as we've moved through the build process, and some reasonably unique features that we've incorporated into the building to get the most out of it. There's a list here of some of those features in the new building. I won't go through all of those now, but what I will note is one of the most important things we've learned throughout this project is it really pays to be involved in the design and build process right from the start. And we've been really fortunate to have been able to provide input in all stages of this process. And that's meant there's many small things that will make a really big difference to the performance of our laboratory that we've been able to work with the design team to get into the building. Now, when it comes to moving, given the very precise nature of the equipment we use and our requirement to maintain traceability, how we manage the move is going to be critical to our success. So we've planned for this, even down to custom building, very stable, very low vibration trolleys, specifically to move equipment from one location to the other. And in this image here, you can see one of the trolleys custom designed and built by Hamish Edgar, one of our staff, specifically for the purpose of moving precise metrology equipment. So our plan for moving is very much tailored to the different standards areas that we'll move. For temperature standards, we intend to move all lab equipment across to the new laboratory in one sequence of work. And then once all that equipment is in the new laboratory, we'll reconnect and commission all the equipment in a second piece of work. For the electrical standards area, where the reconnection and commissioning of equipment is a more time-consuming and a more complex task, we'll take a different approach and we'll move equipment one science setup or piece of equipment at a time, moving it across into the new laboratory and reconnecting it, and then going to the next piece of equipment and moving that across. So the order that we move and set up equipment in will be dependent on the availability of our own specialist staff, but also on commercial demand. So for example, we'll look to clear any commercial work reliant on a particular setup before we disconnect it and move it across into the new building. Ensuring that we maintain traceability throughout the move is going to be really important to us as well. So our approach at a high level to maintaining traceability will involve a test and measure for each piece of equipment prior to moving it so that we can obtain a baseline quality statement. Then we'll complete a quality statement for the move itself, so noting the conditions of the move and any unique occurrences that happen during the move. And then finally, once the equipment is reconnected and set up in the new site, we'll again test and measure, and that will give us a comparison of performance pre-move and post-move, and also allow us to note any contributing factors from the move itself that could have had an impact on the performance of our equipment. So we expect to take possession of the new building from June this year, so quite soon. And once we take possession, there'll be a period of environmental testing of the HVAC system. So that'll allow us to ensure we understand the system well, and also allow us to set up an optimal environment within the laboratories before we actually start moving in. Then from August onwards, we'll be moving equipment into the new lab. And as you can see, the move time for temperature and electrical is scheduled to occur over many months. That doesn't mean all the equipment and services from these areas is unavailable at that time. Rather, it indicates that there's an intensive period of activity up front, followed by a long tail of work to ensure all the equipment has been moved into the new lab, set up, commissioned, and is operating as we expect it to. And in workstream 2 for our time standard, we expect the new lab space to be completed after September, and from there we'll follow a similar move approach with all equipment expected to be out of the old laboratories and into the new laboratories by mid-2021. Now, as you can imagine, a wholesale move of our laboratories will mean some disruption to the services we provide. For temperature and electrical standards, we anticipate the most significant area of impact to our service delivery will be in that initial move period from August through to November of this year. We're hoping to confine that major impact to that period. However, there will be an ongoing period while we finalise the move where there may be some disruption to service delivery. As I said earlier, the disruption won't mean that all the equipment and services from those areas is unavailable for that whole time, but it will mean, depending on our move and recommissioning schedule, not all the services will be available throughout this period. So we'll seek to lessen the impact on our stakeholders by ensuring that, where possible, stakeholder calibration and service needs is able to play a part in our move schedule. We'll share with our stakeholders an indicative move schedule so that you can see what calibration services we expect to be interrupted and over what time frame. And we're inviting feedback from stakeholders so that you can let us know if the move schedule is going to cause disruption to your operations, and that will be the opportunity for our team to then engage with you to see how we can minimise the impact as much as possible. So we'll be regularly updating our website, measurement.govt.nz, with progress of our lab move. So to stay up to date, keep an eye on the new MSL laboratories page on the website. And of course, if you have any questions on the move itself, feel free to contact me directly or use the Contact Us service on our website.
That's great.
Thanks very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Cliff. That was very interesting and very exciting for us MSLers who've been watching this whole process and being a part of the process as well. I do have a question for you though, Cliff, and that's in regards to just describing and explaining what's been the biggest challenge with this lab design and build, because it has taken a number of or a long length of time from inception to get to this point. So yeah, what's the biggest challenge in your opinion?
Yeah, so that's a really relevant question. There was considerable time where it seemed like nothing was happening, and so just actually getting out of the ground was a significant achievement. Some of the delay or challenges that had to be overcome there were there's a significant water table underneath our Mackay site, and so there was quite a lot of engineering and design that had to go into how we actually designed a slab that wouldn't get impacted by a potentially rising water table. So a lot more design and intellectual grunt than you would expect for just pouring a concrete slab.
Great work. Okay, and just finally, I know that we're all really eager to be in there and to be fully operational. So I guess it's understanding when can we start officially welcoming visitors to the site to have a tour. Obviously we need to work around an official opening event, but when do you see that the likelihood of us having a building that's complete and functional and operational?
Well, that's a wonderful question. Complete and functional, depending on the definition we put on it, it could be right until the end of that project when we've finally got all of the electrical standards equipment in and set up, but that's quite some time away. And I expect that from the time that we take possession of the building, ownership of the building, and we're able to start moving our equipment, and depending on our move schedule, We could then look at having selected guests come in and see the laboratory, view it. In terms of a large grand official opening when the whole laboratory is finished and it's fully operational, that's probably some months away, because as you can appreciate, there's quite an intensive move process that has to be undertaken first.
That's great. Thank you very much, Cliff. And yeah, exciting times here at MSL. So just keep an eye on that MSL website. That update page will keep updating as we progress through that commissioning project. So now I'd like to move on and introduce our next speaker today. Dr. Murray Early is a principal research scientist here at MSL from our electrical team. And Murray will be talking about MSL beyond the SI redefinition. Thanks, Murray.
All right, thank you, Cynthia. I'm trying to share my screen. Hopefully you can now see that. All good.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's hard to believe it was a year ago today that we changed the definition of the SI, and perhaps one of the greatest revolutions in the system since its inception in 1875. So it was a major triumph, I guess, and today I'm just going to briefly talk about what's been achieved, but also perhaps looking forward what's coming next. Right. So here's the revised SI, the new SI with the 7 defining constants. And if you look at that, I think you'll be immediately convinced that there's a lot of physics in there, and really, unless you've kind of done a physics degree or something like that, you're probably going to struggle to understand that. And that's one of the things I'm going to briefly mention today. It's all in the International System of Units brochure, the 9th edition there. But in practice, each of the areas, technical areas, has developed a sort of a practical set of guidelines, the mise en pratique as we call them. And that really tells you, if you can see the highlighted text there, it indicates how the definition of the SI-based unit, whatever it is, may be realized in practice. And so what's going to happen is over the coming years, as new technologies, new discoveries are made, these mise en pratiques could change and evolve, but the basic set of defining constants will probably remain much the same. Let's just have a quick think about these defining constants. What do they represent? Sometimes people call them fundamental constants. I'm not sure if this is quite the right term. Certainly these two, the Planck constant and the speed of light, I think I would call fundamental constants. They are sort of the natural scales of our universe. We don't know why they have the values they do, but we live with them, and they are very, very important in physics at the very basic level. So definitely I would describe those as fundamental. The next one is the elementary charge used to define the ampere. It's not quite as fundamental in the sense it's the characteristic of a thing. It's a bit like a perfect artifact in a way. But really the root of that is really in the fine structure constant, which is the constant that really governs electromagnetic interactions, so theory of QED. And so it's really that charge derives from alpha, is why all elementary charged particles, free particles, have this exact same value, whether it's a proton or an electron. So definitely that's set, fundamental. Then we get a couple of others. We've got the Boltzmann constant and the Avogadro constant. And these, in my mind, they sort of link the microscopic world to the macroscopic world. So especially the Avogadro constant, chemists doing chemistry in a lab generally are working with macroscopic quantities, but the reactions are occurring with atoms and molecules. Similarly with energy at the macroscopic scale, you can think of temperature as a measure of thermal energy, but really at the microscopic scale, it's to do with the motion of small particles like molecules and atoms and so on. And the Boltzmann constant kind of makes that connection as well. And then we have the candela, the very special unit because it relates to human vision. It's the only one that's got a human dimension to it. It kind of relates to the brightness of light according to how humans perceive it at a particular frequency. And it's based on an average of human responses. So that set, I think you'll see, I don't think the set is going to change in a hurry. They will largely remain as we have them today for a long time. The last one, which I have mentioned, is the second, and that's definitely an empirical constant. It's just a certain energy transition in cesium is assigned a certain value, and that then we derive the second from that. But these are complicated atoms, and there's no way you could calculate this. It's just simply what it is, and we use it, and it's extraordinarily successful because it's a very reproducible and stable quantity. But you can see that one there is unusual in that respect. It's just kind of a made-up thing. And you might ask, well, does physics give us any idea of time? Well, it kind of does, but it's not a very practical time. There's the famous Planck time, 10 to the minus 44 seconds. And I think you'll all agree it's not really particularly helpful. Interestingly, it's derived from these constants, H, G, and C. And of course, big G, the gravitational constant, is one that we don't know very well at all. So there's no value in this at all. But I'll come back to that because this is the one that's probably still going to change within a matter of years. By the way, people anticipated such a system more than 100, 150 years ago. So Planck could see that if you could get away from artifacts and properties of this planet, you could have systems that would work even outside our planet and anywhere in the universe. So he talked about having a non-terrestrial and non-human measures would be possible. And so it was very obvious to these great minds 150 years ago that this is where we should be. And maybe they'd be a little bit surprised we've taken so long to get there. Earlier last year, Angela Merkel made this speech at the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos in January, and she talked about the redefinition. And she actually, if you see at the bottom there, she used it as an exemplar of how the world should cooperate. And in some ways, we should be very proud of the SI system. It's a remarkable degree of cooperation and collaboration around the world, consistency, and certainly it underpins global trade in a very significant way. That you can buy parts from anywhere in the world. If they've been measured under the system, then they will work, and you shouldn't be concerned with that difference. If you go back 100 years ago, you couldn't do that kind of thing. It was way more complicated. So we have a very simple system. It works very, very well, and it encourages a lot of innovation and trade and so on. And so Angela Merkel, who's a scientist herself, endorses the idea. So she likes it. When it came to actually implementing it, so a year ago we made the transition. Obviously the three standards of length, time, and light were not affected. They already had defining constants from some time back. Temperature, they did nothing. They're still using ITS 90. Chemistry, they pretty much did nothing as far as I can tell. I think they're still probably using mass measures. Maybe they might have added some uncertainty. I'm not sure. Mass had to add a small uncertainty to the kilogram and the derived scales from that, but it's a small contribution. And electrical made very small adjustments to the two constants, the Planck constant and the elementary charge. The reason we had to do that is because we derive DC voltage comes from the Josephson constant, which depends on E and H. And you can see the number changed from, we had a sort of a standard value prior to the definition of the KJ90, and we had to change that to the new value with the extra digits. And you can see Tim here at our Josephson system making that change in software, and that would have taken him maybe 5 minutes. So the point is, what happened on the day after the redefinition? You know, it's like Y2K. What was the consequence? Well, pretty much the sun came up and the world was pretty much unchanged, and nothing really happened. So there's a temptation to think, well, the 2019 redefinition, is that it? It seems a bit underwhelming in a way. But that's kind of to miss the point. The first point I make is that, in fact, this is the language Barry English used at the MSA conference, that we wanted to avoid road bumps. We wanted to avoid changing the definition so that it would cause worldwide differences. For instance, say the mass scale changed by 1%. Just imagine the complexity and the inconvenience and the cost of doing that around the world. It would have been horrendous. So, in fact, a massive amount of work was done over, say, 20 or 30 years to ensure that there was a very smooth transition so that nobody would really notice. And it's only those who had the very highest standards that would actually even seen the smallest impact. But that's only because so much work was done to ensure continuity. And that was a very important part of the change. They didn't want to disrupt the whole global system. I like to think of it as the foundations of the international system of units have been rebuilt. We used the house is basically the same house. That hasn't changed, but we've built better foundations for it. And this should be, support the whole system for years, decades, possibly centuries to come. Just quickly, here are some of the benefits of the redefinition. There's a strong connection. We've built on the best science that's available. It's compatible with new technologies. As new technologies come along, it's unlikely they would require changes in the definitions, and they'll just be absorbed into some of these mise en pratique type documents. In fact, it encourages really innovative ways forward, because before it was kind of a little bit prescriptive. You had to do it a certain way, but now there are many ways, and probably more ways will come around how we can implement some of these definitions. So it's enduring, it's stable, and as Fleur mentioned, it's local. You can build a Kibble balance here in New Zealand, realizing the mass scale, independent of everyone else. Of course, you want to make sure you're consistent with everybody else, but it doesn't need an artifact from Paris. Just a couple of drawbacks. One is it's become a more abstract thing. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It's probably more complicated. And a technical point maybe is that it breaks the links to the CGS system. Many people still use CGS units, especially in magnetism. And they used to be, it was fine because it was an exact relationship, but now that's no longer true. So when magnetic fields are measured in Gauss, there's a sort of uncertainty between the unit of Gauss and the SI unit of field, which is the Tesla. So there's subtle differences. They're not big, but really it's a good time. If you're using CGS units, you should stop and go to SI. Right, explaining it, pretty tricky, because the two, for instance, mass and length were artifacts, and perhaps I would just think everybody could understand this, that we derive our scales from these two artifacts for mass and length. But now we've replaced that by this, which are roomfuls of cryogenic electronic kind of setups, not cheap, complicated to rather hard to understand. And of course, nobody's really going to simply understand that. How do you explain the new system? Because we want to kind of carry people along with us. MSL's done a few things over the last year or so around this. The first one I mentioned was a project with the Royal Society on powering potential, and Fazana here was working with a group of students over 3 days with the idea of saying, well, how would if you're going to land on Mars and talk to the Martians, how would you communicate issues around measurements, define common understanding? And this is exactly what the new SI does for you. You couldn't have done that in the past. So just like Planck anticipated non-terrestrial applications, this is one way of looking at that. And it was a very useful project to understand that. The second is perhaps the unifying concept of energy. There's a couple of papers came out on this about the time of the redefinition that were quite useful in understanding the sort of the structure of the redefined SI. And so you can see here this is a sort of natural pyramid where you start with the second in time, and then space, and then matter, and that gives you the concept of energy. And then you can talk about energy in its different forms. You've got thermal energy, gives you the Kelvin, electrical energy gives you the ampere, optical energy gives you the candela, chemical energy gives you the mole. That's not really how people work with them, but nevertheless you can kind of see this unifying way of looking at all these defining constants. And lastly, I just refer you, if you want a more sort of a basic understanding of the structure of our system. Richard Davis put out a paper that was really quite useful in explaining the relationship between the constants and the units. And it's not entirely trivial. So you'll, for instance, if you look at the kilogram there on your screen, you'll see that it depends on the cesium splitting, it depends on the speed of light, and it depends on H. So it's not kind of straightforward in a way. But anyway, that's a really useful paper if you want to have a look at that. The other thing we did was a road show with around New Zealand with our Lego Kibble balance. So this is built to illustrate how the Kibble balance works. Two key things about the Kibble balance is, one is you need a coil that goes past a magnet and generates a voltage, and you also need to put a current through that coil to balance the force of a mass. So there's a current measurement and a voltage measurement, and so this is where I see things differently coming from electrical metrology, is that the current measurement and the voltage measurement are hidden away in that white box down the bottom there. So that's not how I would do it. I'd do it differently. This is how I'd build the Kibble balance model. It's a shunt carrying the current, and it's a voltmeter measuring the voltage, because that's really where the quantum values come from. It's the fact that your meter is voltmeter is calibrated against the Josephson system, and your shunt is calibrated against the quantum Hall system. That's where H and E come from. And then I would put the little balance thing in a white box under the table. So I'm only joking, of course. But anyway, it's an important part to realize that that's kind of the connection, is that you use the quantum standards, quantum electrical standards, to derive mass. That's the new way forward. Okay, let's just think a little bit about the future. Just a few more slides. What's coming up? Well, what's everyone working on? Certainly in the mass community, in some ways the definition was a little bit premature, because the world is kind of vulnerable in the sense there's only 1, 2, maybe 3 experiments that can really do this well at the moment. And in a sense, they were done for research purposes. Why should they keep them going? And yet we're now depending on these to define the whole mass scale. So there's a definite need to sort of manage that, and the mass community is working on about a 10-year plan to make sure that it remains in good hands. The length people have a number of interesting applications, nanoscale metrology, and a lot of high frequency precision demands. The second, I'll talk about that in a minute, because that was the one constant that's probably going to be redefined. The ampere, there's lots of new quantum technologies here of interest. Temperature, they're still sticking with ITS 90 for now, but probably heading towards a new scale that will more closely resemble the thermodynamic temperature. Chemistry, I don't believe they are strongly affected by the redefinition, but they have a massive parameter space to work in, lots of incredible materials and molecules, and COVID-19 is just another one to look at. They have many things to consider, a very complicated space. And then the candela is moves towards a quantum candela based on single photon metrology, and also they have other technologies. So the space of activity in metrology is very broad, very relevant to technology, but also trying to keep in touch with good science. Just briefly mention the redefinition of the second. So that the old cesium system was based on a microwave transition, but by going to a much higher frequency transition, the performance gets so much better. And you can see the graph there that the optical frequency standards have now surpassed the cesium standards. And the group in charge of that are looking at a redefinition possibly by 2025, something like that. Maybe they always take longer than people expect, but anyway, it's coming for sure. But nevertheless, it will still be a very empirical kind of value. It won't really be a fundamental value, I don't believe. It's too complicated. I just want to remind you that, in fact, GPS, which is based on the cesium clocks we have today, has generated $1.4 trillion in US economic benefits since it became available. So there's, the return on investing in good standards is phenomenal. This is just in the US. Maybe it's 2 or 3 times bigger than that and will continue to grow. With these new clocks, more accurate clocks, who knows where that will lead. There are problems in the sense they don't necessarily operate continuously. It may be hard to commercialize them, I don't know. It's still very much early days, but you know, if you can do time better, then you can do position better. If you're trying to control driverless cars or plan your drone strikes or something, you might find that these new clocks make a huge difference. So that's definitely coming. But there's perhaps one other just general area of concern. One, I think, as I say, we've built new foundations for the same SI, but we've built it on slightly shaky ground, not completely shaky, but it does need a bit of work. And these are around improving the rigor of the SI system. And MSL is involved in a number of these. One is the scientific basis of the system is not quite as rigorous as you might hope. And that's because it kind of just it's grown over the years. So the role of angle is peculiar and not well properly treated. What we've learned over the year, you go to high school and you learn how to fudge some of these things, but they are fudges. And so the role of angle is kind of fudged in this system. The geology system, again, is another kind of fudge. It's unusual, it leads to some unusual consequences. And it needs to be thought about a bit more, I think. There's still debate, still papers coming out about what is actually the fundamental set of constants. And nicely, as metrology has moved closer to the good science, there is now a greater interest in the philosophy of metrology. You can see that book there. The second area is in digital metrology. I want to just point you to the talk by Blair. And the idea really is that machines should be treating measurement quantities properly rather than being patched as we generally do when we write software. But there are problems because of the issues in number one there, that there's non-uniqueness of units and so on. So it's not entirely trivial. If one was done properly, then probably two would be easier. So they are related. And then the third one is providing a physical basis for uncertainty. This is a really contentious issue at the moment, and MSL is fully involved in that, Rod and Blair and so. And it's probably going to lead to a future revision of the uncertainty guide. But there's really quite a strong debate between the mathematicians and the metrologists about how you really think about uncertainty. So I just want to finish there, just to remind you that the new system is built more solidly on science, a little bit more difficult to explain. I would say that's true of most of the units, but in fact for electricity, probably the elementary charge is easier to explain than the old force between two infinite wires. The new system supports future technological and scientific advancements. It's a great foundation to build on. Probably needs to become a little bit more rigorous. But don't worry, NMIs are there to take these abstract physics definitions and convert them into real world measurements for people, for industry, and for use in our country and around the world. The redefinition of the second, it's only a matter of time before that happens. And I just kind of mentioned that the quantum systems are becoming more and more pervasive, and certainly in the electrical area, not only it's the DC systems, the AC systems, power, impedance, and everything is heading towards quantum systems. So these are my conclusions, and I'm certainly happy to take any questions, but I'll hand back to you at this point, Cynthia. Oh, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Murray. And we do have a question for you, and that has come from Claire. It goes back to the slide about improving the rigor of the SI. And Claire's question is, what do you mean by the role of angle?
Yeah, so at the moment, if you have an angle in your equation, it's usually done as a dimensionless quantity. So there's no unit associated with it. And so sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. And you kind of have to know whether you need it or not. So the proposal is to put in some quantity like radian and treat it as a normal unit. And you'll be surprised actually which quantities have it there without you realizing it and which ones don't. So yeah, it's definitely an active area of debate at the moment. Papers are coming out in recent years around that. It's always been a bit of a contentious one, but yeah, I can send you a paper if you're interested to it'll explain some of the specific examples of where this is. For instance, it may require Planck's constant to have H or a revised version of H, depending on whether the angle is there or not. So it could lead to quite a fundamental change in how we represent the science. So yeah, it's an interesting issue.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Claire, and thank you, Murray, for your answer. Just
Yes.
going to a question on the chat there. Does MSL plan to build an optical clock?
Yeah, that's a good idea, for sure. I mean, that whole area of clocks is just incredible. The way it just goes on and on and on and keeps developing and getting better and better and better. We haven't really had a research project in clocks at all. I think some of our colleagues in Australia have had that, but we would certainly, we should think about this for sure. We now have some greater ability to do this, and we have some new scientists and working on frequency combs, which is a very relevant idea. There's universities in New Zealand, back to Otago, Dodwalls, also has interest in clocks. So hopefully we can start something, but at this stage we don't have any specific plans.
Great. Okay, thank you for that, Murray. Very, very informative talk and some very interesting stuff coming out of the SI and the redefinition. So I'd like to move on now, and the next lot of talks were pre-recorded and released on the YouTube MSL YouTube channel last Friday. So hopefully you've had the chance to watch these and can ask any questions through the Q&A function as we go on. First up is a live panel discussion about the MSL Apprentice program. Our panel will summarise the talks and then respond to any questions that you have. And to kick this off, I'd like to introduce Lenice Evergreen. Lenice is a research engineer with MSL and the driving force behind the development of the Apprentice program. I'd now hand you over to Lenice.
Thanks, Cynthia, and happy World Metrology Day, everyone. It's nice to see you all here today. It's just a bit disappointing that we don't get to share a cake this year. I hope you've all had a chance to watch the videos that we posted on YouTube. And I look forward to answering any questions that you might have about the scheme and how we're implementing it. So you can just type those in the Q&A box down there. Earlier in my career, I worked in a consulting capacity with lots of different companies in industry, and wherever I went, I'd meet one or two wonderful, bright, engaged young people who were already working in industry and wished that they could learn more. We would have these awesome conversations about quality control, calibration, methods, GD&T, traceability, standards, and general metrology. And I often thought how great it would be to have training easily available for those people in those areas. I would also hear from managers across the board about the difficulty of recruiting skilled candidates, as well as upskilling their current staff. So when I started at MSL, I was really excited to get involved with the apprenticeship scheme as a way of addressing these issues in second-tier labs and other industry companies. I think we've made a great start, defining the concept, identifying resources, designing the learning program and the assessment structure for an apprentice, as well as actually recruiting a candidate affectionately known as our guinea pig. Of course, it's an evolving project. We're learning lots and we're very happy to receive comments and feedback from you. And we'll keep working to make it relevant and useful for New Zealand. I'm pleased to see that the government is investing in apprenticeships and industry training in the latest budget. And it will be interesting to see if this means we can further formalise and maybe even accelerate our scheme. Today, we're lucky enough to have Nina, our amazing foundational apprentice, with us. And so, without further ado, please welcome Nina.
Thank you, Lanice. Hi there, everybody. I'm Nina, MSL's Metrology Apprentice. I wish you all a happy World Metrology Day from here on the beautiful Kapiti Coast. Hopefully you've managed to watch our YouTube videos on MSL's YouTube channel and have seen my one about my experience so far as MSL's first Metrology Apprentice. For those of you who haven't seen it, I will sum up in a few sentences what I've covered in that video. Coming to MSL was a huge transition for me. It was vastly different from working in a bakery. However, I am really enjoying my time at MSL, even though I do find it challenging at times. I am constantly learning new skills, whether it be from my mentor Lanice or other staff at MSL, courses I have completed or am currently attending, outreach activities I have participated in, and work placements I have attended, such as at Air New Zealand. I look forward to the next year of what my apprenticeship brings. Now I would like to introduce Paul Biddick, Air New Zealand's Calibration Coordinator.
Hello everybody, I'm Paul Biddick and I look after Air New Zealand's calibration labs in both Auckland and Christchurch. We're a team of 20, we have 12 engineers, 2 technical support engineers and 6 support staff. We not only look after all of Air New Zealand's test equipment, but also perform calibration work for a lot of external customers. We regularly see apprentices coming through the lab as all Air New Zealand trainees get to spend 2 weeks in each area of the engineering business in their first year. So we get to induct them, we put them with an engineer for 2 weeks and try to teach them as much as we possibly can. What we found is that most of the trainees will never ever come into a calibration lab again. So this is our one and only opportunity to actually give them the chance to learn a wee bit about calibration, but also how to use their tools correctly, how to get correct readings out of the instruments they're using, and along with care. Care is just as important as anything else. And what we found is, teaching them that if they drop a torque wrench or if they drop a micrometer, that they need to actually send those tools back into us, and so we can actually look at them and verify that they're still within limits. And we found that by doing this, we've greatly reduced the amount of issues we have with tooling, the amount of out of tolerances we get, and the amount of tools we have to replace. So it's time well spent. But as I say, 2 weeks isn't very long, and we have to actually make the most of that. Hosting Nina was quite different. She came to us from MSL, and it was quite obvious she'd had some really good training. She knew all about calibration. We didn't have to spend the time inducting her and putting her through some small training courses. She knew a lot, and she came to us, full of energy and with a great desire to extract as much knowledge as possible from us. And she fitted in really quickly with the team. I'm sure she enjoyed spending the time with the team, and I know the team actually really enjoyed working with her. Over the 3 weeks, she worked extremely hard, and she got to spend time in many different areas. She was actually really self-driven, which was good. We didn't have to say, hey, Nina, this time today you're going to be working with this guy or this guy. She really drove her learning herself. I'd see her working in the dimensional lab one day, or she'd be working on the torque tester the next day. So she actually got around, and she did quite a lot, which was really good. She's certainly, as I said, very energetic and very driven. So that's good for us, seeing that. Hosting apprentices for us is a win-win, as we get to see the calibre of the new blood coming through the industry while passing on some of our knowledge. And as Nina said in her YouTube clip that I looked at this morning, we are a commercial lab, so we are time-driven as well. So not only do we have to be very accurate with what we do, but we also have to do that work in a time frame that we've committed to do it in. So I'd like to thank Nina for spending the time with us. We certainly enjoyed hosting her. Nina, you're welcome to visit us anytime. The guys all as I say, really enjoyed spending the time with you. And we really look forward to hosting the next MSL Apprentice. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Paul, for those words. We'll definitely take that on board for the next one. We've got some questions and I'll direct them to each of our panellists. The first one is going back to Lenice and in regards to the recruitment of an apprentice. So how did you find, what was the sort of process that helped you select the right person, and the right person being Nina this time round? So Lenice, can you answer that one?
Yeah, great question, Cynthia. So one of the things that we identified quite early on is that the right candidate had to have some specific personal attributes. It wasn't really their skills that we were looking at, because we would be able to teach them, teach those skills to whoever the candidate was, but it was just that the way that they approached life in general, actually. And so through the, we did a phone interview with a short list of people that came from our recruiting outreach, and then from that we kind of identified the people that had the kind of the curiosity and the willingness to learn, and we felt were approaching the position with the right kind of attitude. And from that we broke it down to an interview list, and I think we interviewed 4 different people, and just from that interview we kind of got a really good sense of what they were hoping to get out of it, and from there we selected Nina.
That's great. And another question for you, Lenice. What has been the biggest challenge in getting this program up and running?
Wow. The biggest challenge has really been being able to find enough time to spend with Nina, because of course I'm not just Nina's supervisor. I also I also have other technical work to do, and so sometimes I can set Nina a task and I assume that that's going to keep her going for a day or two, and then like 45 minutes later she's back and she's like, yeah, okay, I've done that, what next, kind of thing. And so being able to juggle the time that I need for technical work as well as having Nina under my wing. So quite often I go, okay, that's awesome. For the rest of today, you're going to come and just have a look over my shoulder and watch what I'm doing. So that's been part of it too.
That's great. Thank you, Lenice. And I'll stick with you for this one as well, because it's in regards to the recruitment from Claire. Mm-hmm. Where did the recruiters get the shortlists from? Was it a job ad?
Oh yes, we used the our regular Callaghan Innovation recruiting process, and we told them that we were looking for probably somebody that had just left high school or had just done a little bit of tertiary education maybe. We weren't looking for PhD graduates or anything like that, and so they targeted those ads to different high schools and other tertiary places, as well as Nina said, on Seek and other places. So yeah, we did get quite a few. I can't remember the exact number, but we got quite a few replies, but a lot of them were way overqualified for what we really wanted.
That's great. Okay, so I've got a question now, and for Nina, and that's just, what is the coolest thing that you've learned while you've been at MSL? So Nina, if you can answer this one.
Gosh, I would have to say, in regards to metrology and the length area, would be learning knowledge around geometric dimensioning and tolerancing, and I'm pretty sure that has come from Lenice, because it's really been pushed on me, and she's super duper enthusiastic about GD&Ts, because she's probably one of the most skilled people, if not the most skilled person in the country with a CMM and operating it. So as Linese has said, I've been looking over her shoulder quite often when she's measuring customers' objects on the CMM, and I'm learning all sorts of technical language, as well as I think one time we were operating a articulated arm CMM, but they all run the same software if they're within the same brand. So then I can learn the cool language, which is really awesome. Yeah, I'd probably have to say that.
That's great. That's great. Now I've got a question for Paul, and that's in regards to in your lab and through your recruitment processes. How do you find the job market? Are there many people out there that have the skills or not, or what do you need to do in your lab to upskill them, I guess?
That's a very easy question to answer, and that's no. There's not many people around. And Linese just touched on it just a moment ago as well. You either get people who are well overqualified for the role, who would get bored very quickly, or we have to carry out quite a bit of training. That's both internal and external, because when we advertise internally and externally. And I think last time when we applied, we advertised, I think we only got about four people. So you know, to pick someone or the right person out of a group of four, it's not always easy. So in the past we have actually advertised and not taken anyone on, because you know, as people have said today, you've got to get the right person for the job, and if you don't, well, you know, you're in a hiding to nowhere. So a lot of it for me is when I'm actually looking for a person, it's not really about the skills that they currently have. It's a lot of it's about attitude and their willingness to learn. So there's a balance. You know, we do struggle. We eventually get there, but the market in New Zealand is very small.
That's great. Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the panel. We will now move on to our next pre-recorded talk from the MSL YouTube, and that is all about the MSL Kibble Balance project, and will now be summarised and questions answered by MSL's research scientist and Kibble project team member Yin Hasin Fong. Welcome, Fong.
Hello everyone, happy World Metrology Day from the MSL Kibble Balance Lab here, RMG17 Grace Field. So you can see here that's the magnet assembly there, just directly behind me. And yeah, that's the part of the lab, but anyway, maybe I can show you more later if time allows. Yeah. So about my presentation, I'll just give a quick summary for those who haven't got a chance to watch it. So firstly, I gave a quick recap on the redefinition of kilogram, which happened last year, and the basic working principles of Kibble balance, which links the kilogram to the Planck's constant. I also described the features of MSL Kibble balance that is based on the novel twin pressure balance design. Then I explained the challenges of creating such a novel Kibble balance, the MSL Kibble balance, and highlighted some of the progress towards addressing these challenges, which includes the magnet assembly, alignment issues, rotating cylinder, laser interferometry, and electrical measurements. That's the quick summary of it. And I'll be happy to take any questions. Back to you, Cynthia.
Thank you very much, Fong. And yeah, I do urge everyone who hasn't already seen that video on YouTube to have a look. Very interesting project and spanning a long period of time. So when we talk about time, Fong, I'd like to ask you if you can just give us an answer about when is it likely that MSL's Kibble balance will be fully operational and actually realising the kilogram for New Zealand?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, so I think actually there are two parts to that question. So the first one is about realizing the kilogram for New Zealand. So to enable individual realizations of the new kilogram or for any NMIs internationally, there are still more work to do, as Murray has kind of alluded to before. If we need to do those realizations, then we need to have better in resolving the discrepancies between realizations, more better realizations, improving the experiments, and establish the long-term stability of these realizations from around the world. So to do this, there will be several international comparisons between experiments in the next decade or two before dissemination of the unit of mass can by individual realizations can take place. So basically, it is still a long-term international effort before we can reach to that stage of realizing the kilogram for good for New Zealand. And this leads me to the second part of the question, which is when is it going to be fully functional? Of course, that depends on how you define fully. Maybe, in my view, we can say that fully functional is when we are able to take part in the international comparison. For that, we need to achieve an uncertainty of at least 100 parts per billion. So for the first phase of the project, we just want to show that our novel, unique, no cookbook recipe, Kibble balance can work and spread out some sensible numbers with uncertainty of a few parts per million. That will be our first step at least. So we hope maybe sometime next year we can have some of those measurements. But then again, since it is a metrology research project, if we take care of every component careful enough, if we understand each component well enough, then maybe we will be surprised actually that we can get better than what we had expected initially. So we'll see. So it's still an open question basically. But thanks for that question. Back to you, Cynthia.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that, Fong. There's no other questions that have come through. We'll wait until the end of the session and we'll have a look at that again. Moving on to our next speaker, and this was another pre-recorded talk that's on our YouTube channel, and this is from Dr. Blair Hall. Dr. Hall is a principal research scientist and quality manager from MSL and is leading the MSL response to ensure that we're represented in the global development of data metrology. Welcome, Blair.
Thank you, Cynthia. Hello, everybody. I'm also on the Kapiti Coast, like Nina, but unlike Nina, I'm not able to come to you on a video link. So I'm just trying to share my screen with you now. Can you see that,
yes,
Cynthia? Yeah. So I've just got a few slides to summarize some of the parts of the talk that I do hope you have seen, which is online. So data metrology, it's not something that will necessarily appeal to most metrologists. I think most people come to metrology because they'd rather measure something in the laboratory. And all of us, I think, are familiar with using computers. And so you may be saying to yourself, well, really, what's the big deal? What's data metrology all about? So the purpose of my talk is really to give you just a heads up that change is coming. And there. So the nature of this change is going to affect the way that we communicate, the way that we exchange information. And we're going to have to adopt digital formats for that. So one of the recent events is that the CIPM, just late last year, decided to set up a task group supposedly on the digital SI, that was their name for it. And the principal objective of this task group is to establish a digital version of the SI brochure. And the reason for that is so that information about measurement can be exchanged digitally in an unambiguous manner. So there was a plan to hold a conference in just a few weeks' time in Paris and bring together people to discuss this issue a little bit more generally and how best to address it. But unfortunately, that event has now been deferred because of the virus situation. Another example is an initiative taken in Germany by the Metrology Institute there, which is called PTB, they've been working now for several years on a format for digital calibration certificates. This is a format that uses XML, which is a files format for digital exchange of information. And their stated aim for this is to create an internationally recognized format as an exchange format in the entire field of metrology. So clearly they hope that this digital calibration certificate will in fact sooner or later take over the world. So I think it's an important development, and I think that it's likely to show up on our shores in some form or other in the not too distant future. Another initiative also coming out of Germany, but these are European projects. So although the lead is Germany, they are funded by the European Union and there are European partners involved. Another one is called the European Metrology Cloud, and this is intended to support and streamline regulatory processes, so it's of interest to the legal metrology community. So there's a number of things going on, and MSL this year decided that we should be engaged with the international community working on these things. So one of the initiatives that we took was to organize a special session at an industry conference, an IEEE conference, that was to be held in Rome next month. And of course, this too has been impacted by the situation with the epidemic in Italy, but it is still going to be held, and so there will be a virtual conference, in fact, online on those same dates. So that's a sign of the times, I think. There will be a lot more exchange of information by virtual meeting. So data metrology is a multidisciplinary field. Digital systems, of course, are not made by metrologists, but there is an opportunity for metrologists to provide the correct conceptual foundations for their development. And so that's why MSL thinks that it's important to be involved. So I think that's a summary of what I wanted to say. So back to you, Cynthia. I'll stop sharing my screen.
That's great. Thank you very much, Blair. And I just think that I'll just put this back to you. Obviously, data metrology and this field of metrology is quite rapidly evolving, and when we compare it against the typical speed of scientific research, are we able to keep pace with how that's developing, do you think?
I think the scientific research can keep up. It's a technological problem. So as I alluded to before, most metrologists would rather be doing something else. And so there has been a tendency, I think, for metrology to lag. And that's why we've only just seen the CIPM react and set up this task group, where I think it's been obvious, perhaps to industry for some time, that things needed to be done. So I think that we need somehow to work with the experts in industry around digital systems, and we need somehow to convince them that there are key pieces of knowledge that metrology holds. There's the fundamental measurement science is the bit that needs to be correct from the outset, and then we let them take over the technological developments around that.
Okay, that's great. Yes, it comes back to the fundamental science that's behind it, which is really important. I've got another question here for you, Blair. Will you be working with IANS to ensure all reported CMCs follow the same format? At present, it can be difficult to compare labs when some use UV/V and some percentage and some combination. Do you get that?
Yes, I get that. Of course, we would work with IANS. We would be happy to. I don't think there is yet a solution to that problem. I think it's a known problem, and indeed, in my talk, I alluded to a group out of the NCSLI organization in the United States that are attempting to tackle some of those issues. But I think that's why MSL is trying now to get a little bit ahead of the game, to join in with the trailblazers, so that we do know what's going on, and when the time comes, we can help.
That's great. And another one for you, Blair. What do you think is the appetite for moving to digital calibration certificates?
Amongst, I wonder whose appetite we're talking about. I suspect at MSL that the appetite is not great. I think this is an industry-driven thing. So when I look at the sparse information I have from overseas, I think industry are pushing for this in Europe. I don't know that there is any demand for it yet in New Zealand, but I think that's probably where where things will start to emerge. People will say, well, can you please provide us with this format of information? And when that happens, we'd like to be ready.
Excellent. And I'll just stick with you, Blair. Another comment here or a question for you to respond to. This looks as if it'll be important to all New Zealand calibration labs. I hope MSL will be able to hold workshops and write technical guides to help us with this in the future.
Yes, I hope so too. It would certainly be our intention to help and disseminate this information. But I think I don't want to alarm anyone. I think that this is an emerging technology overseas, and we have yet to see much evidence of it propagating in the Asia Pacific area.
That's great. Okay, so if we just want to sum up and come back to just answering a few last questions or asking a few last questions that have popped up over the last little while. I've got one here, and we go right back to Murray for this. If you're on standby there, Murray, can you give us what are the opportunities arising from the SI redefinition that you are most interested in?
Well, certainly for the electrical area, it wasn't so much of a change for us because we'd already kind of gone our own way. We'd gone to these 1990 definitions, so that we had the quantum Hall effect and the Josephson effect, and we're sort of moving forward. And the nice thing about this redefinition was it kind of brought us into consistency with the SI. So and that's really why the change took place actually, is because we could do these electrical measurements so much more accurately than the connection to the SI allowed. So that's all good news. And that's probably the interesting thing for me, that these quantum systems are becoming more and more common and applied to all sorts of areas. So that's the electrical perspective. But I think, for instance, the interesting one for me, like I say, is in temperature, where they were always around the fixed point of the triple point of water was their defining point. And now they've gone to a defined constant. You kind of don't need that anymore. You can do whatever you like. You can apply it at different temperatures. It doesn't have to be 0.01 degrees C. It can be anywhere. And so it sort of unleashes new opportunities. And so that will definitely be a very interesting area as to how they might adopt some of these and then move closer to a thermodynamic
Hey Murray, we can't hear you. You need to put your mic down.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't have my microphone down. Briefly, I was saying electrical quantum standards is fantastic, and we've always been doing this and we'll keep doing this. And so that's been good. But an example of perhaps where a new area might develop is, say, in temperature, where the Boltzmann constant takes them away from the connection to the triple point of water. And so it will lead to all sorts of new opportunities, I think, for them. These will take years to unfold, but it's sort of, you can see the change. You're going from a very prescriptive, well-defined thing that you can't move away from to sort of opening up the whole range for applications of different kinds. Similarly with mass, I think there's some interesting things there that, okay, they've gone to a Kibble balance definition, but in fact, it turns out the Kibble balance is quite good at low mass. So one way of realizing the scale down low is through a direct Kibble balance rather than doing the normal scaling things. So these are the kind of opportunities that are now available to us that weren't available before. And I'm sure there's others in optical area for sure, the quantum candela and so on. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in all these things. I think they're fantastic, and they'll be real. They will turn up in the MSL labs and NMIA and so on over the years. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Yeah. Okay.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Murray. I've got another question here. If we go back to Lenice, and the question is, when will MSL start the process for recruiting the next apprentice? And what sort of overlap do we expect with Nina? Will the next apprentice likely be, or what area is that likely to be within MSL? Can you answer that, Lenice?
Yeah, sure. So the next apprentice probably won't be in length, but it'll be in another area of MSL. I'll still be available to assist, of course, because I know how hard it is. We're looking to have about a 6-month overlap with Nina, because we know that it was quite lonely for Nina right at the beginning because she had no one else anywhere near her age on campus, and it was like a big new thing, and it would be great to have the new person, to have Nina there as kind of a buddy for them. And also Nina can teach some things to the new apprentice, and that then reinforces her own learning, because sometimes when you go to teach something, that's when you truly understand what you've learnt. Yeah, so I'm not sure which area of MSL that'll be in. We're looking to have a 6-month overlap with Nina, and we'll probably start recruiting later on this year.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much for that, Lenice. And just to end, if there's any other questions, please flick those through now on the Q&A. And in summary, this has been something quite new for us, and going forward it would be great to have this type of forum on a more regular basis. So be prepared, everyone who has registered. There will be a survey that will come in the next day or so, and we really appreciate your responses to that. So I'd just like to thank our panelists today and for putting yourselves out there and going live, and the talks that we've managed to pre-record and get up on our YouTube channel. As always, if anyone's got any questions, we always welcome feedback and questions through our Contact Us from the MSL website. We're here to help. The territory at the moment is a bit of an unknown, and I dare say unprecedented times for us, and I wish you all luck going forward under the new COVID-19 imposed restrictions for your labs and your organisations. So thank you to all our attendees. I trust you've taken something of value from this experience, and we bid you all farewell. Thank you very much, and goodbye.